Welcome to the Plant Cunning podcast,
where we explore a relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York.
We are your hosts, AC Stauble
and Isaac Hill.
Okay, so welcome to another forecast on the Plant Cunning podcast with ZamboniFunk. This is the Aries Ingress forecast. So we're going to be looking at the Aries Ingress, which is the spring equinox, and what's going on in the spring quarter. So how are you, Zamboni? How are you doing?
Oh, we just ain't here living a dream, one day at a time. It is a beautiful day to be out here and looking toward the opportunities that arise in times of great upheaval.
Yep. We said in the last forecast, everything is changing, and everything seems to be changing. So that's how it goes. Great upheaval.
Change is the only thing you can really count on.
Yeah, it really is. So how's your winter quarter been? Is spring there for you yet?
I did notice that there are some flowers poking up yesterday.
Flowers? I remember those. We don't have them yet, but yeah.
Yeah. There's one particular flower that comes in about this time of year, and it is gorgeous, lovely to see. It's not under ice and snow at this point. We had a lot of that this year, and a lot of freezing rain that turned into ice and that then got snow on top of it.
Yeah.
And so it was pretty hellish and dreary for a really long time, but all of that has melted. And while I wouldn't say that it's exactly springtime yet, we are on the way. And, I am looking forward to seeing the sun again, and looking toward, I don't know, something about like the moment where there starts to be some sun and a little bit of warmth, something about that feels hopeful all the time. And I'm delighted to see it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we kind of have that today a little bit. It's like 60 degrees and there's warm sun and the snow is starting to melt. And
we let the geese out to wander and eat some grass that's emerging from the snow melt.
All right. Yeah, I'm sure they had a good day with that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I had a morning this morning where I had a little bit of coffee right in the sunshine. There's sunshine directly on my porch right now, which is kind of annoying for my dailies because it like washes out my whole situation. So I gotta like move everything around and try and get into the shadows and whatever. But when I'm just sitting there drinking my coffee in the morning, like it's prime time. Love to see it.
nice.
That's great.
Yeah, this has been a pretty intense winter. I was lucky enough to be in India for 5 weeks, so I was able to escape a little bit, but it was the most cold, snowy winter here ever, and I got sick more times this year than I ever have before. And
Same.
a lot of a lot of people I'm hearing people are getting colds and flus a lot more this winter. So
we're a little sick right now, so sorry for the congestion.
Yeah, I just got back from India. I still have a little bit of henna on my fingers.
There it is. Yeah. There it is.
And the cold I got traveling is still with me too. So
yeah, for sure. I see a little pink on your nose over there.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
But it was definitely worth it. It was amazing. It was an amazing experience to be there. So it's spring. Spring is coming. It's here. It's on the way. Here and then we'll get some more winter and then it'll come back and then the usual
full
two-step
spring.
Yeah, totally. We're not there yet. And that's kind of the theme of the episode. I feel like is that we got to get through. We're not to the easy part yet. The good news is there is an easy part coming, which I don't always forecast, but there's some nice stuff that is on the way. Q2's not it, but we're on the way there. We got to get through. We got to get over a couple of humps, but there's something nice coming, and so we are. There is hope and opportunity yet on the horizon.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to talk about the Aries Ingress chart, and
I hear that this is a more hopeful situation than even you expected.
Well, yeah, I don't want to be a downer, but according to the Aries Ingress chart, the the changes that are happening in the government will turn out to be of a benefit for many of the people in the U.S. So that's just one thing. There are a couple other, like the Aries Ingress chart actually looks a lot better than I expected it to. Obviously, there's a lot of upheaval and so on, but there are some lights at the end of the tunnel. And the eclipse chart is also really interesting, the solar eclipse chart at least. So those are charts I want to talk about today, and then we're going to also talk about all the ingresses and conjunctions, and retrogrades and stations, direct stations, and so on for the spring. So there's a lot going on. Where do you think we should start? Aries Ingress?
Yeah, let's talk. Well, before we get to the Aries Ingress, let's maybe contextualize that a little bit by
Okay.
noticing that the Aries Ingress, which is the beginning of the spring season, that comes and that one of the things that you point out all the time is that that particular ingress is a very big deal because it maybe begins an astrological year. And so that moment comes right in the middle of eclipse season.
Yeah.
So in that moment, we will have already seen the full moon lunar eclipse in Virgo, which is happening in 2 days from where we are right now. So I don't know when this episode is going to drop, but it'll probably be right around that eclipse. And so that eclipse will have happened, and then we will be on the way to a next solar eclipse in Aries, which will happen after the ingress. And so to see this moment of solar or the ingress into Aries looks like a moment where there's like major like the way that I like to think about eclipses a lot of times is like there's a seesaw kind of energy to it because it'll happen on the one side of the zodiac and that's a lunar eclipse, and then it'll happen on the other side of the zodiac and that's a solar eclipse, and then it'll have that same thing will happen on the other side of the year. So it's like a seesaw kind of motion all the time. And so we're in the middle of that seesaw situation by the time that the ingress happens. And so what we're already noticing there is that flux is the move. Like big changes is what's happening already, and then the ingress happens.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very important to next notice and contextualize the ingress. Yeah, the lunar eclipse is happening on the 12th, morning of the 13th, and then the ingress, the Aries ingress equinox happens on the 20th, and then the solar eclipse is the 29th. So it's really right in the middle. It's really interesting how
Hmm.
that's happening, and that, doesn't happen very often. But but yeah, and another thing about the Aries ingress and the importance of the Aries ingress. Um,
Hmm.
I'm doing an in-depth, I'm in a 5-year program studying to be a Parashara scholar in the lineage of Jyotish that I study in. And we have to do a project on a particular person and look at their horoscope and like go to do a very detailed analysis of their birth chart, like book, basically a book. And so I'm doing Simon Foreman, who is a 16th century English astrologer and doctor.
Hmm.
And we have his birth time, and he wrote copious notes about all of his clients and everything, so we've got a lot of information on him.
Hmm.
And I looked, all of his notes were actually transcribed or like uploaded to the internet now. You can find them on the internet. And I went to look at the notes, and the first graphic that I saw of his notes was an Aries ingress chart for like 1582 or something.
That's interesting.
And it was looking at the chart and I was trying to decipher. It was like, oh, it's the sun is at 0 degrees Aries. Oh, this
Huh.
is an Aries ingress chart. He was looking at the Aries ingress. So it's like this is something that's always important, and it always has been important, for a very long time, to tell the tale for the rest of the year. So it
Hmm.
gives us the indication of what's going to happen for the rest of the year. So that
Yeah,
just a
so what's going
little,
to happen this year?
yeah. So let's
Tell
look
us
at the
about it.
chart.
When we
Okay.
say ingress, do we just mean like like it's coming on the scene? Like what is an ingress exactly
Right.
in layman's terms?
So yeah. Yes.
Uh, an ingress is just like a planet moving into a sign.
Okay, cool.
Right.
To
So
ingress means to come in.
Yeah, got it.
so the moment that the sun crosses the solar node, which is actually the 0 point of tropical Aries, he ingresses into Aries, tropical Aries. and that is the moment of the equinox. So the equinox points are actually the solar nodes. It's really interesting. So
Hmm.
it's very important because the tropical zodiac is a it's a solar zodiac, and the sun kind of rules the zodiac. So that spring equinox, that it is the beginning of the astrological new year. And so what we do is we cast a chart for the moment of the solar ingress into Aries for the capital of the country that we live in, to see what's going on in that country. So this is for Washington, D.C., and it's at what, 5:05 a.m. on March 20th. And so we have right here the sun at 0 degrees Aries right there. And you can see he's conjunct Neptune and the North Node. So he's just a few degrees, a few days after that eclipse
Hmm.
that was happening. And so we have Aquarius rising. We have 9 degrees of Aquarius rising. And the lore is that it says that when a fixed sign rises in the Aries ingress, that means that that chart is good for the whole year.
Hmm.
And then if it's the movable sign, it's only good for the quarter. And if it's the dual sign, then it's good for half the year, you know? So since it's the fixed sign rising, this chart is good for the whole year. And if we just delineate the chart by what the rules say, and one more aside. So when I practice Vedic astrology, I'm looking at people's natal charts, and I'm looking at the sidereal chart using the whole sign houses and all the tools from the Vedic astrology to see the person's soul and their karmic blueprint. And I'm looking at at the map of their karma. And that's what the Vedic astrology is especially good for in this tradition. But when I'm looking at mundane astrology, at least for now, I use the tropical zodiac, and I use the rules from the like traditional 20th century modern astrologers, which are in this book. And I'm using the book by Raphael, which is the early 20th century, late 19th century. And
Hmm.
they use the tropical zodiac, and they use the Placidus houses. They use the modern planets. So I'm going to be using all those as well. So I'm using the rules from this book to interpret this chart. And
Hmm.
it makes sense for me, especially because it's like the soul is like beyond the heavens, beyond the world. And so I'm using the sidereal zodiac, which is kind of like it's the stars. Um, but the tropical zodiac is very, especially in my opinion, useful for mundane events for the world.
Hmm.
Um, so, and that, I may be flawed, and this may go against other people's ideas, but that's my philosophy at the moment for why I'm using the tropical zodiac, the Placidus houses, etc., for interpreting the mundane chart of the Aries ingress. Okay,
Hmm.
so that aside, when we just look at and just delineate this chart, we see Moon is in the 10th house. And it says in the book that when the moon is in the 10th house and has good aspects and not any negative and not negative aspects, then there will be popularity of the monarch or government if well aspected. Popular questions and measures will come to the front, and the masses will benefit. Trade and business will prosper. And we see the moon here with lots of trines. She's got a trine from the sun, she's got a trine from Mercury, she's got a trine from Venus. The only negative aspect she has is this opposition from Jupiter, which also, according to the rules of this book, is not really a negative thing. An opposition from Jupiter isn't so bad. That just means that there could be some scandal, especially with religious organizations. So that may happen too. But according to this, and the moon is the masses, is the populace. And again, like the government is a populist government. So it would make sense that there are things that there'll be at least some scraps for the populace, right? And then when we look at the sun in the second, if well aspected, if it has conjunctions and good aspects and no negative aspects, and for the rules here, it's saying that conjunctions are not bad. Conjunctions are good aspects. The earning power of the nation is good. Trade and money matters generally will advance. If afflicted, there's a waste of public funds, but it's not really afflicted. However, I would consider the sun to be afflicted that close to the node. But according to the rules here, I don't know if that counts. So this is a good test to see. I'm sure there will probably be waste, but we'll see. But you can see there's all these blue lines, and not really the only red lines are coming from Jupiter.
Hmm. Hmm.
So overall, this chart is relatively harmonious, and there's a lot of action here in the second Placidus house, right? All this is
Hmm.
happening in the second Placidus house. It's the third whole sign house, but all these planets are here in the second house, which is the finances of the government of the country as a whole. And
Hmm.
so the sun being there is a good thing. Mercury and the moon being there also a good thing. It says Mercury in the second, financial gains connected to literature, education, science, and a lot of discussions of finance in Congress.
You mean Mercury and Venus being there, right? Not the moon.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, Mercury and Venus. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with Mercury being there, there's financial gains connected to literature, education, and science, and discussions of finance in Congress. And
Hmm.
then with the Venus there, it's fortunate for money matters in general.
Does
Um,
this include retrograde Mercury and Venus?
yeah, it's just them being in the sign.
Okay.
Though I mean, and this is again from me, like this is a basic reading. I don't consider myself a master of mundane astrology at all, or even of modern, traditional modern astrology. And so those retrogrades could very well be indicating like a reversal too.
Mm,
And we'll have to see, like
yeah.
let's see how this goes. This is an experiment for me too. Um,
Hmm.
and then Mars in the sixth. Um, if free from affliction and well aspected, new ventures, activity, and changes in connection with the military. So Mars in the sixth is actually a good place for Mars to be, if it's well aspected, and it is well aspected. It's just trines. Is it
Hmm.
trines? Yeah, trines. Um, so it doesn't look like new wars either this year, but an expansion of the military and new ideas, new
Hmm.
ventures in regards to that.
Mm.
Hmm. Hmm.
But we can see like that eclipse is happening here in the second house. So there's like big changes, upheaval, these kind of things. And then yeah, we have Uranus in the third. What this says for the third Placidus house is inventions, new ideas in transit, communication, and science. So maybe there will be some
Sorry.
new ideas. 'Cause this is like it's like what's happening now. There's a lot of everything's getting changed. Everything's up in the air. So there is opportunity for new things to come in. That's what
Hmm.
my idea. That's what I'm thinking. So from this chart, like it's 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 my opinion that an astrologer should be relatively objective, right? If we're not objective, then what's the point? I'm
Hmm.
just looking at the chart, looking at the rules and interpreting it based on the rules.
Hmm.
So that's what I'm seeing with this ingress chart. There's a lot of trines. There's the only hard aspects are from this Jupiter, Moon in the 10th Placidus sign, all this stuff in the second house. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of action happening in the national finance in the finances. So, do
Hmm.
you have any opinions about the chart or the things you see that I didn't mention?
About the chart itself, I would say that Mars in the sixth there, as you mentioned, is making a trine to Saturn. And that is one of the most beneficial aspects that Mars can make. Mars, especially in Cancer, Mars can get a little bit out of hand sometimes. There's a sense of being especially sensitive in some kind of way that could lead Mars to act out, but to see Mars making a trine a beneficial aspect to Saturn, whose job it is to sort of like keep things on the rails or to enforce boundaries in some sort of way, then that does look like it looks like Mars doing things in on a playing field that makes sense. And that's one of the things that Mars really needs in order to do the Mars things. The Mars things are going to be like getting things going, getting actions to happen, or you mentioned building up the military or these kinds of things. Like it needs to be in an environment that is bounded, that has clear and concise rules. And so this looks like it is a situation where Mars can really get that kind of thing done, even if it is also ruffling feathers, even if it also pushes into this place where there's deep sensitivity as to what is right, in the moral sense and this kind of thing. Like it might get into kind of a weird space there, but the rules of engagement are likely clear through this. And so that looks like there's great benefit to the Mars things.
Yeah.
Mars is also making a whole sign square to Aries, its domicile, which is to say that Mars can see what's going on there and is able to sort of like rule over that with some kind of, that it is ruling that space and can see what's going on, and so can act on that space. And so to see, I have distrusted this Mars in Cancer basically the whole time throughout the retrograde and all of this, right? Like I don't think that has been good for Mars, but to see that this Mars is feeling bounded in a way that can be really helpful for that Mars, it does look like the Aries things have potential to move toward, a kind of like one of the things that I think about with fear a lot of times, like there's a lot of fear in the air around what's going on in government and this kind of thing. Sometimes action, like having a thing to do and then moving toward a goal, can cure that kind of fear. Now, with that in mind here, if we take a look at what has been going on, then we might guess that there is a rate of change going on in government and the economy that feels breakneck, right?
Yeah.
And so when your neck gets broken, then that can go on to increase fear and instability. You know what I mean? Like if your neck is broken, then you become extremely unstable, right? You can't stand up anymore and this kind of thing, right? And so we definitely are running that risk here. And I would guess that especially with such prominent aspects to Mercury and Venus, who are both retrograde, I would guess that, so if it's Venus's job to bring things together, then Venus in Aries, who is already as far away from home as possible and therefore not likely to do the Venus things in a Venus kind of way, but then also flipped on its head. And so maybe not Venus things, right? This looks very much like a lot of separation energy. It looks like a lot of, again, with the upheaval, but like this looks like move fast and break things kind of energy, which makes total sense if you've got like tech oligarchs in positions of government power. Like their whole move is move fast and break things. That's the whole AI move and, social media
Firing.
algorithms and say again.
Firing federal workers and
All that, right.
Yeah.
Move fast and break things. So what I'm hearing you say, Isaac, is that breakneck speed may, in a year's time, look like some kind of benefit, like people have benefited from that change in things. And if we're looking at the storehouse of wealth in the country, then like there is a major question around like the national deficit and the national debt and all that, right? Deficit spending and all this. And so undoing, in the way that retrogrades have that capacity, undoing deficit spending or something like this may ultimately turn into a benefit for the people and the people's money. So I'll be interested to see what happens here. No doubt, given that this is in between eclipses and there's big retrograde energy here and Mars features prominently and Mars is clearly still feeling very sensitive in Cancer, like there's a lot of major change and like stuff gets broken during this time. And when things break, then there's often a mess that comes after that. But you might find that thing that got broken was in the way anyway.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I guess we'll see. And this is a good test And again, this isn't a full analysis. I'm not doing a detailed analysis of how every planet is interacting. But just like just from like this overall view, it looks like this year will be of benefit to the populace and the government in terms of finances.
In the long run.
In the year,
In the
within
year.
this year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Real quick, what do you make of the ruler of the rising being both Saturn and in the first house?
So actually, the other thing about this book, so there is some modern.
Oh, right. You said
Say
that.
if,
So
say it
the
would be
ruler of the
Uranus.
rising is going to be Uranus, is that right?
Yeah, so you could interpret either as Uranus or Saturn. But so
Yeah,
for
that's going to
Saturn,
change everything.
yeah. So for Saturn in the first, it says that it preserves law and order, crime is repressed, trade and commerce benefit, and laws are fairly administered. So that's what if it's well aspected and not negatively aspected. The only negative aspect is from Jupiter.
Sure.
So
Okay. Cool. Yeah, but law and order. I'm sure.
right. Law and order.
Hard, yeah, it's hard to see it right now, but yeah, well, I guess we'll see.
Well, and the other thing is right now, like as we were talking about, it's really hard to know what's actually going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Everybody's
mhm.
kind of in their bubble of what's going on. So
Sure. I think when we think about this moment historically, it's probably a good thing to remember that we are at the beginning of something like
exactly.
Uranus in Gemini hasn't happened yet. And Uranus in
Right.
Gemini is going to be a 7 year transit, which has typically been extremely important in the life of the United States. And so each time Uranus has been in Gemini, then there's been a major revolution of some sort. So there was the American Revolution, followed by the Civil War. And the Civil War is really interesting because that featured a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries, which we're going to see this year as well. Well, not quite. It'll get really close. But that, and then after that was the United States entry into World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And each one of those has coincided with a leader who might have been considered a kind of king, right?
Yeah.
So we've got George Washington in the first example, and then Abraham Lincoln in the second example, and FDR in the third. And FDR is the one who decided that he was simply going to stay the president for as long as he was going to be there. And then after he died in office, then they turned the 2-term limit of the president, which up to that point had been a custom. They turned it into law after
Mm-hmm.
that in
Right.
order to prevent future kings. Now, it's interesting that Trump is out here talking about like he wants a third term
Yeah.
and he's like,
Well, maybe
I don't know,
because
I
it's
can't
not
help what the people
consecutive.
want.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So while we are thinking about where we're going, we are not to the big part yet. We are crescendoing to the big part. At this point, it's still, I know it's crazy. I know it's crazy to think that this is mezzo forte. This is
Yeah.
not as loud as it's going to get.
And it's also important to note it's hard to know what's actually going on while you're in it.
Right.
We aren't really
Mhm.
going to know what was happening in this period of 10 years for another 20 years. You know what I mean?
Sure. Mhm.
And 1 year, like this is just this year. This ingress just
Right.
shows this year. So that's, in overall terms, it's a small piece of the puzzle, and we don't really know what's going on. But it's a good exercise of astrology lore, to test what the rules say from this set of rules and see
Yeah.
what, if they hold up. So
Yeah. And I like what you did there is you just read it out of the book. You're
yeah.
like, this book says this.
I know.
And so-
Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just reading it from mundane astrology.
Right.
This
Right.
book.
So in a year's time, we will be able to revisit this and be like, okay, so what what happened relative to what the
Yeah,
book said was going to happen, you know?
that'll
So
be interesting.
that'll be a really strong test.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Okay, so should we look at the other, well, both eclipses or just the solar eclipse? The lunar eclipse is total, but it's, yeah, I guess that's first. Let's just look at both of them. Let's look at the so the I'm finding the lunar eclipse to be not quite as interesting. Well, they're both interesting, but
Really?
well, it's just that the solar eclipse happens almost exactly on the degree of the ascendant
Sure.
in Washington D.C. So that's really interesting to me. But the lunar eclipse is also very interesting. So
Yeah, to me, the lunar eclipse is the more interesting because it's more total, because it's like
yeah,
very, very close to the nodes and also features this Sun-Saturn conjunction. And so it's like, it seems really loud to me, but I'll be interested to hear what you have to say about it.
no, you're right. This is a very interesting chart for sure. So we've got the late degrees of Sagittarius rising, and then the eclipses straddling the third and ninth house in terms of Placidus houses, but the fourth and 10th from the whole sign houses. Yeah, and so let me just see here. Eclipses in the ninth house. Trouble to the churches, religious
Mhm.
dissensions and difficult problems connected with religious sects, storms, accidents, or disasters at sea, misfortunes for shipping and sailors, trouble through a colony abroad or from some foreign country at a considerable distance across the sea. That sounds
Huh.
like maybe some trade could be trade wars or like
Oh
issues
yeah,
with
we're already in trade wars.
Hmm.
It's that ship has sailed. So, and those are escalating and, there we are effectively in a Cold War with China already, and so we're absolutely seeing economic warfare as far as that's concerned. And then, the idea of tariffs in
Mm.
Canada and Mexico as well, and the idea of like imperialist venture in Canada and Greenland and Panama and these
Oh my
kinds of
God.
things,
Ugh.
like there,
Well,
And
how?
there's
Gaza.
Yeah.
say what?
And Gaza.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, in addition to, yeah, trying to own like the Panama Canal in Greenland, President
Mhm.
Trump wants to like own Gaza and do a good job of it too. That's what he's
Right, right, right.
like.
Huh. Let it
Lovely.
be the Riviera of the Middle East. Like, sure, dude.
So
Um,
embarrassing.
Yeah. So that,
so so yeah, big trade war stuff makes total sense here. What I think that I heard somebody say recently that Trump makes sense if you consider him as a leader who senses that his position is actually weak. And
uh,
And so it's not that he is like the coming at this as like, I'm the leader of the free world, I got this, it's no problem. It's more of a sense of like, I have to regain control.
yeah,
And
Mhm.
yeah,
what I notice here with this eclipse, and eclipses are always going to be good for like head chopping leaders. Like that's just what eclipses are. If we think about like the leaders being the luminaries, and then the luminaries, instead of shining light brightly, they get a shadow across them instead. And so that's like eclipses take out the light of the leadership. That's what they do. But then also we can see that the sun is conjunct Saturn here. And so the sun, whose job is to be vital and exciting and all this kind of stuff, conjunct Saturn, that's a moment of maximal weakness for the sun, especially when we consider that it's also conjunct the node there. And so this is definitely a moment where there is a feeling of weakness in leadership and a feeling of grasping for power and grasping for authority. And so I feel like we are likely to see that kind of, it's the same sort of situation where, Trump is out here talking about like all hell is going to break loose if you don't, show up at a certain time. But then like didn't do anything when the hostages didn't show up, you know what I mean? So it's a lot of bark and not a lot of bite.
Mhm.
So to your point earlier, Isaac, you said probably no new wars, which like love this, love to hear that. You know, it doesn't look like a lot of shooting is taking place. It looks like a lot of yelling is taking place right now. You know what I mean?
Right.
And a lot of feelings are getting hurt and stuff like this, but we're not to the kinetic bit of this warfare.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And at least not in terms of the US, you know.
Right, right, right.
I'm
Which
not
is
looking at the
this
EU
whole thing has
chart.
been very America centric.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm
I'm
not
I'm
looking at
casting these
world
charts for
politics.
Washington D.C. You know, we live in America in the
Yeah.
US. Um
Right, right, right.
one of the things that was interesting to me too was this the emphasis on the religion. So trouble to the churches, religious dissensions, and
Right.
difficult problems connected with religious sects, because it's in the ninth house, obviously. But
Mhm.
when we looked back at that, the Ingress chart, the only planet causing any trouble really was Jupiter. He was
Mm.
opposite the moon and squaring Saturn, the ruler of the ascendant. So and what that indicates is potentially problems with religion or religious scandals, these kind of
Mhm.
things. So both these charts are kind of indicating something happening with religious sects in the US. So I'm
Mhm.
interested to see what that, what happens with that. Like I wonder like what would happen if Doge went after tax exempt churches or something. Like you
Sure.
know?
Yeah, that's a real possibility. I also think that we are in a moment where there's such a major crisis of meaning
Uh-huh.
that if we're thinking about like AI and the way that people there's been a crisis of meaning that has been building for a long time. There's a lack of faith in religious institutions that was just automatically present if we go back even 2 generations or something like that, then that's not going on anymore. And so there's that sense. And then also the Catholic Church's involvement in stuff like Project 2025 makes sense here as well. And so
Oh,
so again, this doesn't reach its boiling point this year, but we can see how this is starting to cause major rifts in the way that people go about organizing themselves.
Hmm.
yeah. Yeah, and I also that Saturn Sun conjunction is very interesting. There being
Hmm.
on, Saturn being part of that eclipse. The Saturn Sun also like in Vedic astrology especially, it's this like anti-authoritarian ification, more like revolutionary or rebel, that kind of a thing, or even like social justice, even like that kind of like because Saturn is like in the Vedic system, Saturn is the people, and Saturn is democracy, or like like that the anti-authority, the common people, and then the Sun is the government,
Hmm.
right? So there's a clash between the people and the authority. So that's another interesting way to look at that Saturn Sun combination is like, yeah, like and as you were saying, Trump, it makes sense that Trump actually feels like he's in a weak position, and
Hmm.
and he is like not just in terms of like half the country hates him, but half the world hates the U.S. and the U.S. is in the weakest position it's ever been in 50 years.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, there's definitely and there's a lot of protest happening too. So I see that Saturn Sun kind of as that protest element too, and as the weakness of the executive branch and of the government.
Yeah. I like that. The executive branch is weakened or is in a weakened state. So yeah, but tell us about the solar eclipse because this is the more interesting one according to you, and I'm very interested to because this one's going to have a lot to say about the executive branch, I think.
Right. And so why it's so interesting to me is this conjunction of the sun and the moon, which is, farther away from the nodes. So it's not a total eclipse or anything. But it's less than 2 degrees away from the ascendant degree, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is so rising. on the horizon, in Washington, D.C. at the moment of the eclipse is the sun
Mm-hmm.
eclipsing, being eclipsed. So that I think is just very potent. And what this says about eclipses in the first house is that changes follow, probably of the nature of the sign in which the eclipse falls. So that'll be Aries, and that can be leaders. But also because it's Aries rising, this is a shorter term situation. Like this eclipse is not going to last as long. And also because it's not total, it's not going to be as potent. But so national problems will give rise to anxiety. The monarch or government will suffer, and some great personage may die. Unfortunate for national health and success.
Mm.
So this is showing, I think, that the current and the likely, like over the next quarter or so, the upheavals and the negative, like the difficulties that the government is going through, and like how close it is to the Senate. It's like it's very potent
Mm-hmm.
for Washington D.C., for the government, for Trump, for all that. Like the upheaval is happening.
Mm-hmm.
A-
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's why I thought that was kind of more interesting. Is just happening right there. Does that make sense? What do you think about that?
Totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, the idea that it's happening right there on the ascendant in Washington, D.C. So like the sunrise is eclipsed on the White House. That's a that feels like it is an interesting moment to look at. Now, I'm not super sold on this eclipse in the first place, just because of how
Okay.
far it is from the nodes.
Yeah.
I almost want to read this as a new moon. Uh,
Okay.
which I have already done, and I've been taken to task for it. All the other astrologers disagree with me on this. Everybody thinks this is an eclipse. So I'm okay. But like it's so far from the nodes. Like this is meeting only technical definitions of an eclipse. This does not meet a visual definition of an eclipse, right? Like it's not, you're not going to see it. You're not going to be like looking at the sun and be like, "Oh, there's a shadow across the sun." If you are even in the path of the eclipse, which we won't be. So so I don't necessarily think that it is, I mean, I don't know. Like we are clearly in eclipse season here. We are clearly in a place where like people talk a lot about guillotines these days. And
Mm-hmm.
Right.
so I would not be surprised if over this eclipse cycle, until the next set of eclipses happens in September, I would if like assassination attempts happened or something like that, like I would not be surprised to see that. I would be surprised if Donald Trump didn't make it. Just like the Teflon Don thing, like everything just slides off of this guy. I don't see whoever his successor would be, like Vance, as being the strongman leader of Uranus
Yeah.
and Gemini. Like I don't see
Nope.
that taking place, you know?
Sure.
So I don't think that like it maybe Musk gets assassinated or something like this. Like again, difficult to imagine, but not without it is possible. I think that the idea that this is happening in Aries. So one of the things that you said is that of the nature of the sign, right?
Yeah.
And so this looks like it is extremely aggressive. And
Yeah.
so I would guess that this is likely to be an aggressive quarter, you
Yeah.
know? And we've been talking about move fast and break things, and maybe this is going to break some necks and that sort of thing, you know? I, if we're thinking about the way that we could be looking at reignition of Civil War type thinking here, I can notice that each side is racing in opposite directions, right? So there is definitely enough upheaval going on that no one trusts the other guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I can see that turning up in a really big way here. I can notice that, Venus in this chart is retrograde, is conjunct the North Node, and is fairly closely conjunct Saturn as well. So like Venus is not doing Venus things here, as far as like connection and cooperation and this kind of thing.
Sure.
So this looks like such aggressive posturing that it feels like war, even if war, like kinetic war, doesn't break out with American boots on the ground.
Yeah, and you have this debilitated Mars in the fourth house,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is just like a lot of anger and turmoil.
And
And
hidden moves.
yeah. And what I'm seeing, all these three charts in context is I'm seeing like this is not that strong of an eclipse, you
Yeah.
know, but what this is representing to me is all of the opposition to Donald Trump, like really
Mm-hmm.
like reaching a fever pitch over the next few months, and then kind of dying down, basically,
Mm-hmm.
in a large
Mm-hmm.
way. They just kind of get like, because he just keeps on every 3 days there's a new thing, you know?
For sure. For sure.
And
Yeah.
at a certain point there's like a overwhelm that's reached. So that's
Right.
what I see is like and we've already seen this intense reaction to Donald Trump happening and to the government. And I see that just getting more intense, but then dying out over the summer, basically, and
All
then
right.
not really affecting his plans, and yeah, the change is happening. That's
Interesting. Let me try something on you
yeah.
here. Okay, so in the Ingress chart, you said that it was likely to be good for the economics of the nation. And this looks like big, like opposition to Donald Trump reaching a fever pitch and then dying out. So I'm thinking here that Trump is in a situation where he's got to get a lot of shit done and make things better for the voting populace by midterm elections. So he's got a year and a half to make a lot happen and to get money into people's pockets,
Right.
right? And so there's move fast and break things, and then make sure that like some of this gets to people's pockets in some kind of way. And then by the time midterm elections show up in a year and a half, which is going to be after this eclipse chart has already, like this is irrelevant by that point, then the fever pitch has died down because some money has arrived in people's pockets a year from the Ingress chart that we talked about at the beginning. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think that even sooner than like the Ingress chart is good for a year. So it's like over this year, finances are going to be better for the government as a whole and for the populace
Sure.
as a whole. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's like there's this massive resistance reaction to Donald Trump, and he wants, what he's going to do, his strategy, yeah, he's going to try to get trying to get money into people's hands and make and give and show like because of course like right now, like the stock market is tanking. There's all these problems happening, but
Hmm.
that's also like that's right now. That's not that's we'll see what happens in the next 6 months and the next year. But yeah, so that's what I'm seeing with the charts, like based on the Ingress chart, it's like over the next year, these things happen. The money, there's a better financial situation. But with that, both of those eclipse charts, there is this opposition, very strong opposition to Donald Trump that is causing him problems and is causing him anxiety and causing like obstacles. And this is happening, but it will die down. That's kind of that. Yeah. So that's my prediction. Uh,
Cool. Yeah, let's
that
let's see. See how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, again, like I'm just trying to be objective and to interpret the chart as objectively as I can. That's my goal.
Sure.
I want to be a better astrologer. That's my goal. So, yeah. I'm not
Hmm.
like rooting for anyway. So, we'll see.
Yeah, we're neither rooting here nor there.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is what we're doing is we're looking at the chart, reading out the book, and see what
Exactly.
happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the Ingress chart. Those are the eclipses for this quarter. So we have a bunch of other fun stuff happening this quarter. We have Neptune moving into Aries,
Sure.
Saturn moving into Aries,
Hmm.
the retrogrades of Venus and Mercury, and then eventually Jupiter going into Cancer before the end of the quarter.
Hmm.
So yeah, what do you think about all of this? What do you think is the most important thing to look at first?
Well, so all right, so everything up to this point has been sort of at the national level. And so with that in mind, let's maybe think Saturn and Neptune real quick, because that I think is another sort of like combination that is likely to see major significance at the government level, in addition to being important in people's lives and this kind of thing. But so I mentioned already that Neptune and Saturn together in Aries, the last time we saw that was in the Civil War.
Yeah.
So it's important to think with, so Saturn's job is to create boundaries and structures, and there's something real, like Saturn wants to make it real in some kind of way. Neptune's job is to be like, nothing is real, it's all it's all an illusion, nothing, like the boundaries are not the boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And so what we can think here is that there's something about like no one knows what's real. No one can tell what is a real thing and what is a fake thing. And so you can think about the way that the first film ever happened, like a moving film, right? A movie happened, and the movie featured a train rushing at the camera. And so then the people who were watching the train on the screen saw the train rushing at them and then dove out of the way because it couldn't tell that there wasn't a real train that was going to hit them, right?
Yeah.
Even though it was just a movie. And to us, it's like, oh, that those silly primordial people, they don't know anything, right? But that's the position that we're in right now, as far as like AI and deep fakes and whatever else, right? So we don't have the capacity to know what is real. What's interesting to me about that analogy is that now we would feel no fear sitting and watching a film of a train rushing at us, right? We would be like, what's going to happen next? And we would sit like and eat some popcorn about it, right?
Sure.
And so this leads me to believe that at some point, people are going to figure out how to differentiate between reality and fiction or fantasy, right? We are not currently in that moment. We're the people who dive out of the way of the oncoming train. And so there, honestly, I feel like there's no shame in that. There's no shame in getting out the way, being like, I don't know if there's a train coming or not,
Yeah.
but it looks to me like it's a train coming, and maybe I don't want to be on the track anymore. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So the having a healthy distrust of what seems like it could be real is going to be at least a major part of the zeitgeist in this moment. What I think is especially interesting about that is that, so what I mentioned the last time we were on here was that Neptune is the wellspring of dreams, right? And so it's Neptune's job to bring forth the dream and metaphor that then can turn into reality because we dreamt it up first, right? And so Neptune moving into Aries gives us this sense that there is an element of competition that is important. And Saturn then coming in there is like, yes, this competition is very important. This is the most real thing that is. And so we need to be more competitive. We need to be strong arming each other and like really sort of like being stronger than the other guy is the most important thing that you can do, right? And so, and especially like one of the ways that I've been delineating Saturn and Aries for a long time is that it is sort of associated with tyranny, right? It's Saturn like trying to rule things, but then Saturn is not comfortable in Aries and is sort of like brash, and Saturn's job is to move slowly and Aries' job is to race quickly, to sprint. And so there's an inherent mismatch between those placements. And so to see Saturn in Aries, and we can think about like Lincoln, for example. Lincoln, with the Emancipation Proclamation, freed slaves that were not his to free, right? And then didn't free the slaves that were his to free, right? Like the Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves in the Confederacy and not in the Union. The reason I know this is because I'm from Missouri, and Missouri was a slave state that was in the Union. And so Missouri slaves did not get free under the Emancipation Proclamation the way that Georgia slaves also didn't get free because they weren't a part of the Union anymore, right? So we don't typically think of Lincoln as a tyrant when like our national memory. That's not typically what we think about that. But if you go to South Carolina, I wonder if they would have a different memory of Lincoln than maybe we do in my state, where we were a Union state. I know in your state you were a Union state as well. So like, I wonder if there would be a different memory about the legacy of tyranny that was present there, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And it also probably depends on who you ask in South Carolina.
Sure,
Yeah.
right. And so, yeah, so what I'm saying is like we can make room for the idea that perhaps Lincoln was a bit of a tyrant, right?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so if we are in this moment where we are looking at the beginning of strongman leadership that feels like tyranny,
Yeah.
then that being sort of like lifted up as this like the importance of competition, and like, so maybe not even thinking about warfare. Like, it's very easy to think about Aries and war, right? But then we can think about stuff like market competition and this kind of thing, right? Like the idea of crushing your competitors until like you do everything you can do to, in a capitalist economy, to build a monopoly. And then you let them tell you that you're a monopoly and break up your monopoly, but you do everything that you can do to build that monopoly in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And so that you that seems like the space that we are moving into at all levels. And so then there becomes the like dream of the billionaire, right? Like the dream of becoming this kind of billionaire gets into the water, right? Like the wellspring is fed with this kind of ambition. And so there is here an opportunity to lean into one's own capacity to compete at a high level.
Uh-huh.
So where you are capable of building yourself up in an individual way to compete at a high level, this looks really good for that. And so if you're interested in like becoming a Michael Jordan kind of figure or something like that, like I'm just the baddest around and nobody can tell me shit, like this is really good for feeding that kind of mentality. It does look like there is. So the other thing about tyranny and like Saturn and Aries is that there's a lot of rules, but they don't really feel real. Like it doesn't, like these rules aren't like, yes, those are the rules, but like what we're actually doing is something different. You know,
Gotcha.
we have to like pay lip service to the rules. The rules are not the rules. And so this looks like a moment where we are coming into a time where this is not actually the year for, like last time I was talking about that and I mentioned piracy, like kind of skirt around and all this. What I actually notice here is that as soon as Saturn moves into Aries, then a little bit later Jupiter moves into Cancer at the end of this quarter. And so Jupiter is in Cancer, making a square to Saturn in Aries. And so that's rough on Jupiter in Cancer. We don't get the nice Jupiter in Cancer stuff until after that square has taken place. And so we're not to the nice Jupiter in Cancer stuff yet, even by the end of this quarter, even though Jupiter is in Cancer, exalted and looking very benevolent and beneficent. It looks like that benevolent beneficence goes toward lucky breaks for the tyrant.
Oh.
So the tyrant is in strong position to like bring down the hammer by the end of this quarter. So this is really good for planning, for thinking through what kind of moves you're going to make, and then make those moves later.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not time to now is not the time to thumb your nose at authority. This is we're not to that point yet. Where if you can bide your time, which is gonna be hard to do with Saturn, Neptune, and Aries. Like I want to be a tyrant too, you know. Like, and patience is not well indicated under Saturn and Aries, right?
Yeah.
So, and you know, I could stand to take some of my own advice sometimes, you know? Like I say these kinds of things in these forecasts and then I'll be wilding in the streets just like everybody else. So,
Sure.
do the best that you can do, but moving slow during that Saturn and Aries period and waiting until a little bit later in the year to like try to mobilize on some of that Jupiter and Cancer and all that is probably a good look here. Does
And
that make
that's
sense
like
the way that I described it
June,
there?
like around June, Jupiter in Cancer.
Yeah.
It starts
Jupiter
with
moves into Cancer
ninth.
June 10th? Sure, 9th. Yeah.
But then when is the square happening?
Oh, almost immediately. So the looks like it's the 14th of June.
Okay. So we're gonna be waiting
It's at
until
1 degree.
okay. So we're waiting until after that, into
Hmm.
the end of the summer, basically, later in the summer.
Yeah, because then, so if you're thinking about Jupiter and you like want to make the most of your Jupiter in Cancer, then so Jupiter moves into Cancer in June and then immediately makes that square to Saturn, but then also comes under the beams of the sun.
Right.
So the sun is too close to Jupiter for Jupiter to shine as brightly. Like one of the reasons why we love Jupiter so much is because Jupiter is such a bright star in the sky. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
Jupiter is delicious to look at. And so since we don't have that sense of like, oh, this is so bright and wonderful, we don't have that feeling until after the sun moves away. And so Jupiter is actually, although exalted in Cancer, is like kind of debilitated a little bit under the beams of the sun and also under a square from Saturn for the first couple of months here. So we do get a lovely period once Saturn moves back into Pisces, and Jupiter is charging forward pretty quickly at this point, and so we're going to get to a point where basically we get a trine between Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn in Pisces, and that looks pretty great. Once we get to Scorpio season, like
Uh-huh.
that's
Yeah.
going to be great. But we are not there yet, and so it's not time. And so the point here is to bide your time a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So the other thing that's happening, like right now, is the early in the spring quarter is the retrogrades of Venus and Mercury.
Mm, hmm hmm
Do you think you could expound a little bit on what that means for people and how people can best surf those retrograde periods?
Sure. Okay, so we are still in the shadow of Mars retrograde. So Mars started in Cancer and then moved into Leo and then stationed retrograde, moved back from Leo into Cancer, then stationed direct and is now moving forward again. And so we're still in this space of like the Mars things, like taking action on stuff and being able to move forward on things has been extremely difficult. And so there's been much sort of like compression and difficulty around all of that sort of stuff. This is relevant here because Mars in Cancer is ruling everything in Aries. And so then that same sort of situation happened with Venus. And so Venus started in Pisces, moved into Aries, stationed retrograde in Aries, and is now moving backwards again through Aries and will move into Pisces. Then will a little bit later will station direct conjunct Saturn on what is this, the 12th of April, and then we'll move forward again through Pisces and into Aries. Also, that Venus retrograde time encompasses that same progress from Mercury. So from Pisces into Aries, Aries, Pisces, Pisces back into Aries. So, this a wise move here would be to give yourself and others grace. So Mars in Cancer has been super sensitive, has been very easily upset, and so that has created lots of discord and strife in relationships that otherwise might have been cooperative, and so I think it's probably a good idea just to, like what happened to me during this time, and this is all in very sensitive places in my chart. And so what happened to me was I got really like I felt really pressed and got into a hurry about what I was going to do. I'm going to make these major changes and I got to move quick on it because I'm getting left behind in the AI era and with all the things that's going on, and I'm not doing enough to make, and so I've started whiling a little bit. And so I started going around to try to get some things done. The people I was trying to work with did not offer me any grace. And so then that like burned a couple of bridges where I didn't feel like I had started fights, but fights got started. And then now those are not relationships that I have anymore, right? And so then I was like, all right, fine, I'll just do this my damn self. And so I'm trying to contract other people and trying to make it happen. And then I ended up burning a couple of bridges with people, and that absolutely was my fault. And this is because I have been feeling pressed about it, right? Under that Mars retrograde and then Venus retrograde also. Venus retrograde is going to be like reevaluating relationships. Are these relationships are they as beneficial and feel good as I had hoped that they would be? Perhaps they are not, right? This kind of thing. Mercury retrograde is happening at the same time. Really easy to get into a place of difficult communication. None of this makes sense to, like, the things that I'm saying are not making sense to the other person. The other person is misinterpreting things that I thought did make sense, and vice versa, right? Maybe I'm the other person in this scenario. Plenty of that, plenty of discord and drama. One of the things that we can see here is that after both Mercury and Venus make it back into Pisces, and they like pass that threshold of Pisces and Aries, and they conjoin Neptune there. Plenty more confusion. Nobody knows what's happening. None of this makes any sense. Then by the time we get to the direct station, then both of those folks are conjunct Saturn as well, right? And so this does look like a bit of a downer. It looks like a bit of a situation where it's like, okay, fine, we're not doing this anymore, or something like that, right? It does look like the sort of situation where if you are in position to generate a contract or some other kind of infrastructural means of holding a relationship together based on like rules that are intelligible, then Venus conjunct Saturn is really good for that kind of thing. But that is likely to feel pretty transactional, and like, which isn't what Venus in Pisces tends to want things to be delicious and like, oh, it just all feels so good and just bring me more of it, this kind of, especially Venus conjunct the North Node, like bring me some more pleasure. And that looks like there is plenty of difficulty and miscommunication and confusion that takes place over this time. So here's what I'm talking about grace, right? Like, you can learn from my mistakes by offering yourself and others grace at a time when, if we're thinking about retrogrades, then like forward motion isn't happening during this time. And I don't care if you feel pressed about it, it's not happening anyway. And so like trying to force things into motion probably isn't going to be the wave. Now, once Mars, so it's going to take Mars a little while. Mars is still in the shadow period, right? And Mars is going to be in shadow for a while. Mars doesn't make it into Leo until April 17th. And then once Mars makes it into Leo, then finally, at least it's not Mars in Cancer anymore. And so Mars is starting to heat up, and Mars likes the heat and this kind of thing. We do see that there's an opposition to Pluto fairly immediately. And that opposition to Pluto this time is going to feature a T-square to the Sun in Taurus as well. This to me looks like probably land grabbing or this kind of thing, like on the world stage. It definitely looks like the kind of situation where if you are in position to lean on a weaker party, you can probably like take some power in doing that. Or if you are the weaker party, then that could happen to you. And so it could be worth thinking about, like, okay, so where if I am in a position where someone could lean on me and I could lose some power, then how can I make less power beneficial to me? And sometimes is actually beneficial to have less power, like in situations where, like, I work at a restaurant and I don't envy the owner of that restaurant at all.
Right?
Like,
Exactly.
yeah, there's a certain sense of like, all I do is show up and clock in and then do my work and then clock out, and this is marvelous, right? And so
Love it.
right. And so there are ways to make a better life out of less power, but it looks like power grabs and that kind of thing want to take place with that Mars moving into Leo. Then after that, then Mars moves past that opposition to Pluto and past the shadow degree at 5 degrees of Leo. And then we see Venus moving back into Aries and then making this nice trine to Mars from Aries. And then from that place, things start getting into order again. And so what we're looking at is plenty mess before things start getting more intelligible and more actionable. So what I would think here is that there is a kind of power in bless this mess. You know what I mean? Like, it is gonna be a mess, and let's just let that be what it is. It doesn't have to be all intelligible. It doesn't have to all be actionable and workable in this moment. Even though the mess might, there can be anxiety associated with clutter and these kinds of things, right? Like, that's a real thing, but perhaps trying to force it into order doesn't look like it's working in this moment, especially if we think about like a full moon lunar eclipse in Virgo trying to take place here, right? And then that turning into seesaw head chopping eclipse kind of energy. Like, maybe you don't need to force all of that. Maybe there's a moment here. Can you rest? I don't know. Maybe. Do your best.
Need some rest.
Right. And so there's a lot of worrying, a lot of worry wart energy going on here, and everybody's freaking out about the tariffs and about the state of the government. And like, one of the things you were mentioning, Isaac, is that like the conspiracy theory types, who, even the ones who like the right-wing government, they're freaking out as much as left-wing types are freaking out, right? So like, there's a lot of that going on in the air. And so listening to that less might be a move here. And whenever we're thinking about Venus retrograde, so Venus retrograde in Aries is likely to be sort of upsetting and inimical, competitive, combative, this kind of thing. Moving into Pisces, there's definitely more of a question of like, what kinds of things do I like? How can I find my pleasure? What kinds of things are even desirable here? And so, especially with that conjunction to Saturn going on as well, there is an injunction to be slow and quiet. Even though moving fast and doing things that are fun probably has historically been fun, maybe that's not fun right now.
Gotcha.
And so moving slow and being like, what do I actually want?
Yeah.
Is probably the move. Especially if we're remembering that what I was saying earlier about like, move later.
Right.
Once you got Jupiter in Cancer trying to Saturn in Pisces, like, that looks like really good channeling the motion of the ocean, right? Like, there's great power in these waves, and you can channel that with Jupiter trine Saturn. But before that happens, good luck, right? So maybe if you can think through what would actually be worth doing, what is like, because the idea of value and worth comes up a lot with Venus. And so, drilling into what is value in the first place and what, I've noticed that value is only measured against opportunity cost, right? Like the thing that is valuable is only as valuable as not the thing that you didn't do because you did that thing in the first place, right? So like the eggs are worth $7 because you would prefer to have those eggs than you would prefer to have $7, right?
Yeah.
So it's always about the opportunity cost. And so thinking through what opportunity cost is worth giving up for you and what's not worth giving up for you is likely a good move during this time, which is likely to be extremely confusing. You're likely to get some up close and personal examples of those things that could have been fun, but you felt the FOMO, and then like you found yourself out in a spot where you were like, man, I don't even like this shit. And like there's likely to be a lot of that. So when that kind of information comes in and you're sitting there at the party that you thought you were going to like, and and you're like pouting about it, then like, let this be good information for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
I,
take notes during that time
Yeah.
and mobilize that energy later on in the year.
yeah, FOMO can oftentimes be delusionary. You know,
Sure.
like you think you want to be there, but actually, if you were there, it's not as fun as
Mhm.
you thought it would be.
It's not as fun as it looked like it would be on Instagram.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's really great advice.
Definitely.
Going slow, feeling into what actually is pleasurable and good for you and what you want to be doing in this moment, which may be different than the past, different than the future.
Hmm.
But in this moment, like what is really actually best for you to do?
Hmm.
Hmm. Hmm.
And yeah. So what is there anything else going on in the skies that we should talk about over the next quarter?
That's all of the major stuff.
Okay.
Once we get through that, then, we're gonna see like Mercury's gonna go move through the signs pretty quickly, the way that Mercury does, and we get Mars we get Mars back by the end of this quarter, which I'm super excited about. And I think that like once the sun moves into Gemini, then we start getting into this place where it's like, okay, we can start to see how things can move around. One of the nice things about this sun in Gemini is it doesn't even have to worry about a square from Saturn in Pisces because Saturn is moving into Aries by that point.
Oh.
And so there's a strong sense of like the Gemini things working in a way that like we haven't seen for a little while, you know?
Yeah.
And so it'll be cool to have some strong Mercury. Once that we're even going to see a Mercury Cazimi in Gemini, and so again, if you have, and then so that's going to be Mercury retrograde in Pisces, then Mercury into Aries, then Mercury in Taurus. Mercury in Taurus is probably going to be pretty good for practically planning through, like, all right, so what are going to be the building blocks of the situation and all that sort of stuff, and where can I innovate and this sort of thing. And then moving into Gemini, then like making announcements and saying the thing, and like I figured it out. There's like good eureka kind of energy going on there. So to me, the shape of things is largely, it is difficult and messy at the beginning of the year, and we are still in the first half of the year. But as we make it through some of that, by the time we get into Gemini season and then beyond, then things look like like they become more workable. They like, I don't know if we get used to what's going on or if things actually settle down a little bit, but either way, there seems to be more of a handle on things by the time we make it to the second half of the year. And so take your time.
Okay.
Good.
It's good advice. Take your time.
Hmm.
Okay. Well,
Awesome.
this has been a interesting and fun quarterly report forecast.
Mhm.
It was fun to look at the ingress chart and the eclipse charts and just read from the book, make a couple predictions, and I guess we'll see. As we were saying over the break, that we should definitely do a retrospective and like actually see how these predictions panned out. I think that's a good idea. We should definitely do that. That's the
Mhm.
only way you learn, really,
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so
Well,
here's to improving the craft, you know.
Hmm.
exactly. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks
Thank
again
y'all
for
so much for having me. Appreciate you.
yeah, of
Yeah,
course. It's always a pleasure to
thank
hang out
you.
with you and talk astrology and what's going
So,
on in the world.
yeah, thank you for
Mhm.
being here, and thank you for continuing your consistency with your Instagram dailies and
Mhm.
weeklies, and continuing to support people in all the ways you do through readings and sharing your wisdom. So, if people want to learn more about you, ZamboniFunk.com and Zamboni Funk on all the platforms, right?
Mhm.
Instagram, YouTube,
TikTok.
TikTok. Sweet.
TikTok.
Mhm.
Anything else major happening for you?
There, I teach astrology. Astrology from the ground up is a course that I have put together, and that is out. That is for sale. There's a workbook available there as well, and that looks really good. I'm really proud of how that has turned out. And there are things in the works that I have been alluding to that I've been super pressed about that those are not ready yet. So we're not going to talk about
Yeah.
those until later.
Okay.
Oh, well, best of luck with those. I'm
Yeah.
excited
Why,
to
thank
hear
you.
when they are. I guess maybe come June when the skies are looking a little more clear, maybe we'll hear about those things.
Yeah, we're in the fall.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. More likely. More
Okay.
likely that.
Right.
Heard.
Okay. Well, cheers, Zamboni. Until next time.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you.
Appreciate y'all.
Peace.